Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Brian Southwell. Right, so welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Yeah, hi there, Annie. So my name is Brian Southwell, and I work for a nonprofit research institute called RTI International, and I am the lead scientist for public understanding of science there. I also have teaching appointments at different universities, such as Duke University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I also help out at the University of Delaware, with some courses. And I have been doing work as a social scientist, here at RTI for a long time, thinking about, the ways that people engage with information, in the wider information environment, how that has an impact on their various behaviors and perceptions. And in recent years, we've spent a lot of time thinking about misinformation, as a real threat and a concern for people.
Yeah. So could you tell us about your journey into the field of science and public understanding of science and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah. So I have been, thinking about, how to motivate people, what affects people's, understanding of different concepts for a long time. Before my current set of jobs, I worked at the University of Minnesota for about a decade as well. And I have been interested in trying to figure out, how it is that people come to the decisions that they do, what the impact of the media environment might be on that. We've also spent some time thinking about how we could help facilitate some of those decisions. Back when I was working in the 1990s, prior to my job at the University of Minnesota, I spent some time at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And I did some work on public service announcements on television and radio ads, for example, to try to motivate people to engage in different health behaviors. And it's always interesting to see how people respond, to information in those contexts. Along the way, something that I've realized is that it's often not a matter of just suggesting to people that something to do is a good idea, but people often lack information on how to engage in the recommendation that you're hoping for them to engage. Sometimes people don't see the messages that you put out there. We'll spend all this time working on a public service announcement that only a limited number of people see. And so I've realized that it's really important to think about where people are finding information, and what we can do to help shape those environments. So for example, also back when I was at CDC, we did some work consulting on a script for a television show. This is a long time ago, but the old Beverly Hills 90210, we did some work with them, and realized that in a situation like that, you might actually reach more people, through something like a television show than you might, through a public service announcement. And so I've been interested in, how different patterns in the news environment, and now increasingly with the internet and online environments, are useful for people or not. And we've realized in recent years that a lot of the information that people can encounter isn't necessarily particularly accurate, and there's a lot of problems with misinformation. And so you've seen in the headlines, this has been a real concern, particularly during the pandemic. There's been a lot of worry and concern that people are being misled by misinformation. But I think that we've been approaching some of that, in perhaps not the best way. So people have been up in arms and worried and concerned about, misinformation. And I think, honestly, that oftentimes the people that are commenting on that are talking in a way that maybe isn't as helpful as it could be, as they talk about their neighbors and their friends and their family. And so one of the things that we've done is try to look at the landscape, think about why it is that misinformation comes to pass. Why is that people sometimes pay attention to it. And something that you realize if you look at the psychological literature, the communication research literature, is that uh, all of us, have some tendency under some circumstances to conceivably be, misled by information. It's important, I think, to have some empathy because under the right circumstances, any one of us might be, attracted to some piece of information that seems to be, giving us information that we might want. And so I think if we reframe, this problem as thinking about why and how it is that misinformation is attractive to people, I think that's really, useful. So often, misinformation may be a matter of an error in something that somebody's produced. It may not have been intentional, but even in cases where it is intentional, it's important to keep in mind that people that are crafting that are essentially trying to draw in audiences. They're trying to make it as sensational as possible. They're trying to answer questions that people have, and so it makes sense that they would be sometimes pretty good at attracting attention. And so the only reason I raise that is I think it's really important to have some compassion for people who have been misled by something they saw on social media because it was designed to be interesting to them. And a lot of the accurate information that we have that we wish that they would pay attention to, that's in peer-reviewed journals, that's in a scientific paper, hasn't necessarily been actively framed and presented in a way to be attractive to wide audiences. And so when we think about this question of why is it that people sometimes are drawn into misinformation online as opposed to all this really carefully vetted and accurate scientific information that we also have available, it's not really a fair fight. Because the information that's often out there and circulating that we worry about as being inaccurate, it's misinformation, nonetheless has been designed to travel. It's been designed to be shared and spread by people. And that's not always true if you look at some of the information that gets published in scientific journals or in government reports. So I think part of the effort is we need to work to make sure that our accurate information is more attractive and interesting and understandable to people. We also need to not shame and blame people, for their being attracted to misinformation, but instead think about what we can do to try to provide information for the questions that they have. So I think too often, the question of addressing misinformation for many people comes down to, what can be done to go out and go toe to toe with that information, to combat misinformation, to, vanquish it. And that's part of the story on some level, but I'm not sure that it's actually, the best way to approach this. I think better is for us to think about what questions do people have that they want answered, and how can we make sure that we get good and accurate information into their hands. Certainly paying attention to what's circulating, just like we would, with a virus or a disease, makes sense. But what can we do from a preventative standpoint to also ensure that people aren't feeling desperate to turn to their phone and to turn to different places on the internet? And if you think about it, we don't necessarily always actively go out and reach and meet people where they are and provide all the information that we could. So that's something that I think has been a big part of our exploration and our discussion, and that has a lot of implication for different professionals, that are working in this arena. But there's also questions you can ask about, what high school students, for example, can do, and thinking about this information environment. And certainly there are efforts like yours to put together good information, and that's great. But we also have developed some tips and ideas for people to think about in their own seeking of information, particularly when it relates to health and medicine, and questions that you might have about health and well-being. And there are a few things to keep in mind. First, if you stumble across something on the internet that seems too good to be true, chances are it may be, and it's always useful to get a second opinion, essentially. So, we have all these search engines. There's possible to look for additional information. Basing your opinion on any one thing that you saw advertised to you is probably not the best idea, and you want to often triangulate and look for other information which may verify that or which might undermine it. So that's important. So first, when you see something that's sensational, that seems like it's you're interested in it, but you're not quite sure about it, taking a deep breath and looking for other sources to verify is really important. Second, when you see your friends or family members sharing information that you are pretty sure is false, it doesn't make sense to necessarily just attack them and to criticize them, but rather to kind of find out, all right, why is what they're sharing with you important to them? Where did they look and find this? Can you raise a question about the source of the information? And also possibly point out other sources of information to them. A third thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is to realize that you can pick up your phone right now and type in a keyword, and you're going to find all kinds of different things online, and that's fine to have as one tool, but generally speaking, I think it's really important for you to cultivate a set of information sources that you're aware of, that are credible, that are to be trustworthy, and to pay attention to those, to consult those when you have questions, and to somewhat narrow in your diet of media content on some level, just to think about developing a repertoire or a set of limited sources. That doesn't mean you're not also sometimes going out and looking at other things, but you're also consulting with and paying attention. It used to be the case that we had some really prominent, and we still do, prominent journalistic outlets that are helping to sort through all the information that's out there to make sense of it, and there's reasons why people would pay attention to a news outlet like that. And I think in this current environment, where people can find lots of things on their own, they aren't necessarily thinking about the important work that people are sometimes doing to clarify and to verify information for them. So really paying attention to where the information you're looking at is coming from, who the sources are, to what extent might there be motivation for those sources to be presenting different types of information. All those are good questions to ask, and if you keep that in mind, I think most people are really quite capable of navigating the environment. But it's really more about slowing down, thinking about where you're getting information from, and then hopefully we can find ways to get different organizations to be doing a better job of providing some of this information. So those are just some initial ideas, which hopefully are helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That actually covers like most of my questions. Um,
Okay.
yeah. And what about like social media? Like, could you go into more detail about how you think social media has like impacted misinformation and what can be like done about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So there's something really important to keep in mind about misinformation, which is that it's actually not particularly new. We've been dealing with misinformation for a long time. What is new about our current information environment are the ways in which you or I quickly could share a piece of misinformation with 1,000 of our closest friends. And so it used to be that our media environment was comprised outlets like newspapers or radio stations, and you would find inaccurate information sometimes there. There's worry about fraudulent advertising back 100 years ago with regards to medical products. But now, with a click of a button, you or I could share that on social media very quickly. And so the pace is something, the timing and pace is something that we worry about. And the fact that any one person can reach a somewhat larger audience quickly. So there are choices that people can and should be making about where they're spending their time. These different media platforms and the social media platforms each differ somewhat in terms of the steps they're taking to ensure that there's quality information, and it's a large number of people that they're dealing with, and so there is only just so much that could be done. And so you've got to have that caveat in mind that sometimes when you're moving into a space like this, you're dealing with, it could be your neighbor down the street, and they may not be particularly expert in posting something, but they nonetheless have the platform and the ability to do that. So I think that's something that's important. There are also opportunities, though, on social media, because some of those same mechanisms that allow people to post also allow for some degree of correction. to happen. And so, some of the platforms and some people have experimented with, trying to provide corrective information alongside, information that you might see posted. So it's worth paying attention to some of that. It's worthwhile for people to, think about commenting in a gentle and professional and polite way, about, accurate information, which might counter, what people are seeing. And it's worthwhile, kind of considering, a whole thread, as people discuss something rather than necessarily any one post, because sometimes people are able to, correct, information that gets posted. I do worry, just about, the issue of timing, because you could think about how quickly a rumor can kind of get out of control, in a few hours, and then 6 hours later, somebody might come in and say, "Oh, well, that was actually false or inaccurate," and then everything else kind of dies down. But some of the damage was done, already, with that. And so that's something I think it's worthwhile for people to be aware of, as users of social media. It's something that young people can advocate for. There's no reason why we can't be developing spaces that have some degree of quality, assurance, built in, and transparency. I think is often really important there. So to what extent can people see and be aware of what the algorithms are feeding them? That's something that people could also ask for, is more transparency around the algorithms that shape what you're actually seeing on your social media feed. But those are just some thoughts. I mean, social media provide some positive attributes in some ways. People enjoy using those platforms, but they're not perfect. They're not necessarily a perfect mirror of what all the accurate information that's out there, and it's possible for misleading information to appear on social media. So that old adage of not being careful to not believe everything that you read, it really is important. And so that's something that I think is worthwhile keeping in mind for people that are advocates or avid users of social media.
Yeah. All right. So I think those were actually I covered all my questions.
Great.
Is there anything I have two more questions just like for fun, but do you have anything else to add about misinformation?
No, I appreciate your interest in it. I think that this is going to be a challenge for people in younger generations to help deal with, and so I would encourage people to not be passive in that regard. I think actively trying to help shape our environment, realizing that our information environment is only as good or as bad as the people that are attempting to contribute to it. I mean, it is not automatically there. It doesn't somehow magically appear and just give us a window onto reality. It's the function, the work that we see is a function of people writing and posting videos and doing all that work. Those are human beings. And so if we want to see a better information environment, I think we're going to actively need today's high school students to kind of step in and help shape that and create it. And if you're worried about the nature of our information environment, if you view it to be toxic or not helpful, well, let's help to clean it up. Let's help to make it a better and healthier place. I think that's possible to do. So, but yeah, I'm happy to answer those other questions too. Yeah.
All right, cool. Um, so the first one is what inspires you like in life? Like whether that's like a person, idea, book, etc.
Yeah. So I, for my whole career, have been involved in teaching. It's so I one of the reasons why even when I moved to this position, I spent a lot of time as a leader and a researcher in this nonprofit research institute, but I also leave the door open for teaching. I spend a lot of time mentoring. I draw a lot of inspiration from teaching, partly because it's not just a matter of me pronouncing ideas, but it's also a matter of learning from students and kind of thinking about the next generation. And so that's something that's certainly crucial on this topic. But just generally speaking, I've always found that to be energizing, in a lot of ways. And so looking ahead, thinking about, how some of the ideas I've had, might be put into place or implemented or built upon, by a next generation is really important. And I think also there are two sort of guiding concepts which have found their way into my work in different ways. One is, the importance of empathy, and we talked about that just a minute ago. But I think that's crucial for, solving many of the world's problems. And the second is curiosity. I really think that, the world needs more of it. And that we'd be better off if people were curious, rather than hostile in terms of, approaching each other. And that latter idea is something which inspired, another aspect of my work, which I didn't mention before, but I'm happy to share with you all, which is a public radio show that I host, called The Measure of Everyday Life. And we interview researchers and try to bring their ideas to wider audiences and publics. And really, at the end of the day, what I'm doing in that role is, like you are now, asking people questions and, trying to, be curious about their work. And I think that's really important in a lot of ways. So if you have on your smartphone or other places where you find podcasts, if you just search for The Measure of Everyday Life, you can find that and listen to what's now almost 10 years of back episodes, because we post that just about every week, with some content there. So I'd welcome people to find us there as well.
Yeah, cool. And the second question was, what advice, like general advice, do you have for people, especially like teens?
Yeah. So a couple things. One, I would say, increasingly, it feels like people, feel pressure to have their whole career path mapped out, at an early age. And I think it's important to figure out what some of your interests are, but I don't think that actually it's particularly healthy to have everything mapped out, because the world's continuously shifting and changing, and some of the jobs that you might be involved in, might not exist, today, and they might be, 10 years from now. So I think that's important to retain some flexibility. Thinking about the ways that you actively can contribute, though, that is important. So if you think about your education, not just as a matter of, meeting some bar of reaching, getting some grade or proving that you're smart, somehow, but rather think about your education as, what skills can you pick up along the way in order to be useful in future situations and circumstances? What can you learn that it may not be totally clear, but you have an idea it might be useful, whether it be, learning how to, code, or to speak another language, or to do kinds of certain types of problem solving, or understanding or developing different talents. I think there are ways in which all of those, can be really helpful to future organizations, to future problem solving efforts that you might be a part of. And so the more that you can feel some ownership over your education, and shift from feeling like, all right, everything is about getting a high SAT score or a high, grade or whatever. Instead, no, what are the ways in which I can take advantage of some of what's around me to challenge myself, to pick up new skills, so that, a few years down the road, when an organization, I'm looking to work for that organization, I can offer, here's what I can do, for you. Here's what I can do for different problems. And I think that orientation is really helpful. And I also think it's a really confusing time, honestly, to be, a high school student. So many different things seem to be shifting and changing in a lot of ways. But I think if you focus on remaining curious, on not assuming that anything is automatically going to be handed to any person or any generation, but rather thinking about what can you do to actively contribute, you'll be just fine and things will work out. There are many opportunities, many different pathways, many different institutions to go and study at, where you can do, great things. At RTI, we have hired people from a range of different places, and a range of different backgrounds. What really drives, what's really common to all those people, though, is a sense of their own effort to be useful, their own effort to retain, to be curious, and to be organized, in terms of moving their own careers forward. So I think if you can do that, then you'll be in a very good place, and don't just sit back and sort of assume that it all is going to happen automatically, because unfortunately it doesn't. Unfortunately, a lot of problems we have in the world are a function of nobody really being willing to stand up and sort of address them. We have a lot of the tools to deal with something like climate change or a political polarization, but we need people to step in and do it. we need people to be developing next generation energy sources. We need people to be developing the next tools to help people navigate through the internet. And it's not going to happen unless somebody does it. And so that's the one thing to keep in mind, is to feel some sense of urgency and inspiration to actually start doing some of this work that needs to be done. So, but I think you're all in a good spot to get started on that, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for making time for this as
Great.
well. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Well, you can let me know when it gets posted. You can share the link, and I wish you good luck with all your work.
Thank you so much.
All
Talk
right.
to you
Bye
later.
bye.